Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Ed Pileski, and I'm the Undersecretary for the Massachusetts Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation. Well, I'd like to start by thanking the Better Business Bureau and the Small Business Administration for partnering with us on this virtual summit today. Very nice to share the stage with Nancy, Amy, Norman, and of course, Bob Nelson. Bob, you and I participate in the weekly small business chamber of commerce calls for about 8-9 months now. We haven't met each other, but I certainly have enjoyed all of your valuable input over the months, and it's just great to be here with you today. So we've really looking forward to collaborating with the BBB on an event like this for quite some time. So I'm really thrilled that we're able to be here and come up with this program that addresses some of the challenges facing businesses during the pandemic. But before we get too far down the road, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and what my office does. This is my third tour of duty in state government. Additionally, I spent about 10 years in banking and insurance. I worked most recently in the governor's office. I was the deputy chief secretary in charge of boards and commissions for a little over 4 years with Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito. During that time, I helped the governor appoint more than 2,000 Massachusetts residents to over 700 boards and commissions. And I'm very proud to report that as a result of those efforts, the governor was able to appoint a group of folks, actually 50% of which are women and approximately 20% are people of color. Our mission was to give new people an opportunity to serve and really give different types of people a seat at the table. So we had a great deal of success with that, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment. In March of 2019, Governor Baker appointed me as Undersecretary of Consumer Affairs. I work for Secretary in Housing. I work for the Secretary in Housing for Housing and Economic Development, Mike Keneally, who, along with Lieutenant Governor Polito, is co-chair of the Reopening and Recovery Committee. Just a brief overview of the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, or OCABRA as we call it. It is actually a consumer advocacy and education organization. We support, oversee and support 5 regulatory agencies. You'll hear from a few today, including the Division of Banks, the Division of Insurance, the Division of Professional Licensure, the Division of Standards, and the Department of Telecommunications and Cable. These agencies have a combined operating budget of $66 million and together have approximately 600 employees. We at OCA, we oversee the state's home improvement contractor program, the state's lemon laws, and the data breach notification program for the Commonwealth. Additionally, we manage a consumer hotline that's staffed by 4 full-time Northeastern co-op students each semester. And I serve on a few boards and commissions myself in my capacity as Undersecretary, including I chair up the Financial Services Advisory Council, Treasurer Deb Goldberg's Economic Empowerment Trust Fund Board, the Toxic Use Reduction Administrative Council, and I'm a member of the Cannabis Advisory Board. So I'm fortunate in my role to work with an incredible team. Again, I mentioned our agencies, and we really do have some top-notch leadership, as Bob mentioned. He's been in constant contact with our Banking Commissioner, Mary Gallagher. So together with Commissioner Gallagher, we have here today Commissioner Gary Anderson, who's the Commissioner of the Division of Insurance, and Commissioner Layla D'Amelia, who is Commissioner of the Division of Professional Licensure. And Commissioner D'Amelia is relatively new with us. She started right before the pandemic, so we're particularly thrilled to have her join our leadership team. And with that, I will turn it over to, I think, in no particular order, I guess, Commissioner Gallagher, to talk about this concept that we we discussed leading a regulatory agency during the pandemic, and certainly these three professionals have done that and more. But I'll give Commissioner Gallagher an opportunity to talk about some of the things that the Division of Banks has been doing through this pandemic, and then we'll have Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner D'Amelia offer some comments as well. Commissioner Gallagher.
Hi, good morning. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you, Undersecretary Plesky. Thank you, Amy and BBB. Bob Nelson, nice to see you virtually. And thanks for all the work that you've been doing at the SBA and specifically in Massachusetts. As Undersecretary Plesky said, I serve as the Commissioner of Banks for the Massachusetts Division of Banks. And for your audience, I just want to make sure you know what role that really serves. So the Division of Banks is the chartering and regulatory agency for state chartered banks, state chartered credit unions, and over 10,000 non-depository licensed financial companies and licensees. We have about 160 community banks ranging in size from very small in the tens of millions of dollars of assets to over 13 billion. Plus, we also oversee and charter State Street Bank, which is a large global custodian, totally different business model than your Main Street bank. And on the non-depository side, the 10,000 licensees that we oversee regulate are mortgage companies, consumer finance lending businesses, debt collectors, auto finance, check cashers, et cetera. So quite a broad purview of responsibility areas. And really, our responsibility is twofold. We serve as the regulatory body in partnership often with federal counterparts to ensure the safety and soundness, fiscal solvency angle of these institutions so that consumers have confidence. We're ensuring that these businesses are well run, that they're effectively managed, that they have adequate capital and liquidity levels. And then the other side of the house is really that we're a consumer protection agency. And so we're examining these entities for compliance with consumer protections. And we ensure that as the administrative agency that we are, that we're enforcing the laws and regulations that we're responsible for. So that's a sort of a high level overview of what we do and who we're responsible for. And really the angle that I think we were asked to provide some comments on this morning has to do with managing since the onset of COVID. And like I think you'll hear from my colleagues that run other agencies, there's been a lot that has affected the industry that we regulate. There's been emergency legislation, both at the state and federal level. We sprung into action quickly before even any legislative measures were taken to really encourage the industry that we oversee, both on the depository and non-depository side, to provide relief to customers where appropriate, to work with their customers on individual basis, both consumers and small businesses, to understand the reality of what we're working with COVID and the disruption that's taken place. As Bob Nelson knows very well, the PPP effort, which was a federal program, was really, the mediators were very often the community banks. And I'm really proud of the industry that we regulate, that they worked over Easter weekend. That seems like an eternity ago with Thanksgiving and coming up next week. But, they worked over Easter weekend round the clock to get these loans processed with volumes that were just unprecedented. Decades worth of volume processed in a very short amount of time, and really providing real relief to small businesses and ultimately to employees of small businesses, et cetera. And, the angle that we really are concerned about as the regulator is making sure that again, that there's adequate liquidity, that these companies are fiscally solvent, that the places where you're doing business, either as a small business or as an individual, that your consumer needs are being met. And thus far, I'm really proud of the industry that we oversee. So that sort of is the wrap on my introductory comments. And Undersecretary, I don't know if you wanted to go to Commissioner Anderson of the Division of Insurance next.
Sure. Presentation style. Thank you, Commissioner. I always like to introduce Commissioner Anderson. He's a leader in the Commonwealth. He is a leader in the industry that is well known. He's relied on heavily by the governor and the administration. He's somebody that needs no introduction. Again, in insurance circles, I say that in all seriousness. He's just got a tremendous reputation, and we're extremely lucky to have him within Ocabra and here in the Commonwealth. So without any further ado, Commissioner Anderson, love to hear some thoughts from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and you can hear me okay? Good. Okay. It's always tough to follow Commissioner Gallagher. She does a nice job. And thank you for the kind words, Ed. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the BBB and the SBA, Bob, Norman, for having us. We're grateful to be here. Maybe just a little bit about the Division of Insurance. It's similar to some of the things that Commissioner Gallagher noted on with regard to her responsibilities at the Division of Banks. We have a two-pronged mission, much like the Division of Banks, wherein we are the overseer of the solvency of the insurance companies that operate in Massachusetts. We also are responsible for consumer protection. So that two-pronged mission is something we take very seriously. We have roughly about 1,700 insurance companies who are licensed and operate in the Commonwealth. We have about 140,000 licensed producers, agents, who are also licensed in the Commonwealth to do business. Of the 1,700 or so insurance companies, we have about 80 of which are domestics. That is, they're headquartered here. And what does that mean? That means that we are solely responsible, Massachusetts, to oversee their solvency. And what does that mean? That means that we undertake periodic statutorily required examinations of the company. Those are outside of COVID. Those are typically on site. And then in between those statutorily required exams, we perform constant off-site financial analysis. I think that is the backbone of what we do. And when we're able to do that effectively, we're able to ensure that consumers and policyholders are protected because we won't have insurance companies going insolvent. So that's a little bit about what we do. I would also note that Mary noted the importance of consumer protection. We receive roughly about 20,000 inquiries every single year to our consumer services unit. We also have housed within the Division of Insurance what's known as the Board of Appeal that adjudicates license surcharge. So if you're in an accident, we're the only state in the nation that has a Board of Appeal that allows you to appeal that determination by the insurance company that you were more than 50% at fault. So there are a number of things at the division that we do that protect consumers, and doing that to transition a little bit into a pandemic environment. As many of you know that run businesses, that can be a challenge to almost overnight transition to an all remote work, where some of that was not necessarily ever considered because some of what we do is so paper intensive. It's personal and in person. So that was certainly a challenge, but I think with Undersecretary's leadership, those at OCA, we were able to transition to a remote environment. And while I still struggle many days with the IT component of that transition, I think the working of the Division of Insurance has continued. I'm really proud of the work that we've done. Very early in the crisis, the things that were important, the work that we did focused generally on healthcare issues. We were worried about, as an administration, and from the Division of Insurance standpoint, about capacity at hospitals. So what did we need to do to free up space at hospitals? And a lot of that entailed working with the health insurance carrier and the providers to ease some administrative requirements that are either statutory or regulatory measures that we need to ease those so that we clear space at our hospitals to account for any kind of surge. And as was noted earlier, whether this is like the second surge or a third surge or whatever this next surge is that we're seeing across the country, I think because of the measures that we were able to take early on, as the governors know, we're in a strong position now to continue to provide not only services for people that may have COVID, but also for your normal kind of procedures that you go to the hospital for. That was really important early on. And a critical component to that was telehealth services. So that was stood up first by an executive order of the governor. We then worked with the carriers to put in place almost overnight platforms to allow for telehealth services. That grew exponentially. That's also something I think that we've learned from this that we can do going forward. It's been a goal of the Commonwealth for a long time to put this in place. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to really push that forward. But we've learned a lot. We have a lot of data now that demonstrates a lot of success in a number of areas. And one of those is behavioral health. You can do that from generally from wherever. So I think there are a lot of issues that early on were focused on healthcare. I think we then transitioned to some of the issues as we got into month 2 and 3 and 4 that began to impact small businesses. And just for frame of reference, during a typical year, the Division of Insurance, so for those kind of unfamiliar with the regulatory structure, there are, of course, laws. There are regulations that we implement. And then just below regulations is something at the Division of Insurance called a bulletin. That's kind of finer point guidance to the industry. Typically during a year, we issue about 10 of those bulletins. We are now approaching about 30. And most of that is guidance. For example, you're going to furlough or lay off workers. What can you do to help them with their insurance coverage? You're concerned about paying your premiums as a business. What flexibility are you afforded? So a number of these things, we issued guidance to the insurance companies to work with their policyholders, be they individual or commercial insureds, relative to being flexible, understanding that we're in a time like no other. So flexibility was going to be key. As an example, workers' comp carriers, we guided them to work with policyholders to adjust premium to account for changes in payroll and revenue. In a similar vein, we instructed carriers to work with commercial insurers to be flexible with regard to, for example, use of commercial fleets, and to address payment and premium in light of furloughed workers and business closures, as I noted above. License extensions for those of you that are producers, agents, so that you're not having to focus on your continuing education, but rather servicing your clients. So those were some of the issues that we began to focus on as we started to move through the pandemic. I would note, the last thing I would note, and this began before, but I think is relevant to Bob, to your Norman's members. The governor issued an executive order late in the year 2019, charging me with sitting as the chair over a council, an advisory council that would look into the cost of healthcare, particularly as it relates to small businesses. As we see increasing costs for small businesses, Small businesses are typically, if you're purchasing your insurance through a fully insured plan, you're grouped with individuals into what's known as our merge market. And so we've seen a steady decline of small businesses in that merge market, which with in addition to some other components adding to costs, we've seen increased costs. So we're charged, and we've continued to meet through the pandemic to provide a recommendation to the governor, which maybe the end of the year, early next year, that will give him some options on how to address some of the increasing costs for small businesses in the merge market. So the work will continue, and I'm really proud of what we've been able to do with the Division of Insurance. Has certainly been a challenge, I think, trying to address, because we oversee all lines of insurance, address each of them, I think, in a responsible way, and working with our partners, whether in the business community or the insurance companies, the providers. I'm pleased with where we are, but we have certainly still a lot to do. So thanks, Ed, for the time to share thoughts.
Thanks, Commissioner. Amy, move right along here.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So appreciate it, Commissioner. I believe we have Commissioner Leila D'Amelia with us now. Again, Leila is the Commissioner of the Division of Professional Licensure, relatively new to us. But I will let Leila share some thoughts as well. Commissioner?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I have been at the agency about 8 months. I started a week before the pandemic hit, so it's been quite an interesting experience. It's an agency I know really well. The division regulates 28 boards of registration on the DPL side, and 3 years ago it merged with the Office of Public Safety Inspection. And so we have 10 boards on the public safety side, and we are responsible for state building code, as well as the elevator program in the state, with over 70 elevator inspectors that are out in the field and have been in the field since day one. Even when the pandemic began, our public safety team have never not been out in the field as well. And then we have compliance arms on the board of registration arm, where we license over 28 professions, from psychologists to cosmetology to real estate. One of our, I think, biggest challenges is it's an agency that was never a teleworking remote agency, because we are a customer service agency. So we went fully remote. And I had to work with IT, who did a great job in getting not only computers and laptops, but cell phones to everyone. And that would then allow us to service and continue licensing, but also service the consumers and work through, whether it's an enforcement action or just getting someone's license renewed, and sort of working with all the boards. Some of the COVID-related sort of challenges that happened was, we had students in school, whether it was an occupational school or education for getting their psychologist degree, and how can we work with those institutions to make sure that students could learn remotely, and sort of working with all of the board chairs around thinking sort of outside the box and alternative means of learning. Some, as we all know, some boards are it's easier for some boards, and I say that not as a criticism, but it's really hard to learn to be an electrician in a clinical atmosphere when you're remote, and to see what an actual how to do that work. So just working really closely with all the boards around some of the policy changes that they needed to do to adjust to being in a pandemic. And a lot of the boards have updated their policies. Telehealth is one of the policies that Commissioner Gallagher talks about, and some of our healthcare boards have moved and moved towards as well, that they've never done before, and it's looked at as really successful at this point. We've also had to adjust where there was an executive order where there's some temporary licensing for healthcare related folks, and again, that seems like an easy thing to do, but it has to be executed. So we had to create an online application, get it out, but then we also have to do our due diligence and just verify that the folks were licensed in another state, do our sort of query and SORB checks, and sort of move on from there and get that list up so that even the insurance companies know these folks are now temporarily licensed in our state and they can provide services, whether it's a psychologist or a licensed mental health counselor. And we are in the thousands of how many of those temporary licenses that have occurred. So yeah, I think some of the challenges have actually opened our eyes that distributed work can actually work when we give the tools to our workforce, the software tools, as well as the laptop tools, the cell phones, and then creating and working with our IT partners around how can we actually streamline. It sort of forces us to streamline and figure out better ways to serve not only our customer population, which is our licensees, but also consumers who should have access to us, whether they need to file a complaint or ask a question about a certain profession and sort of what that regulatory scheme looks like as well. So I think, again, working with OCA and all of our partners on the COVID end of things has really kind of, I think, also opened up some avenues. So when we get to the other side, for example, remote testing is really pushing our testing partners around what can that look like, and making sure that there are security protocols in place, but that allows somebody to be able to take a test instead of actually physically appearing, but take it online. And my push to a lot of the vendors is, you can do it. You just have to be committed to doing it. And I know it might take you some time. I have a senior in high school who took an ACT online, which I suspect that would never be something that the college prep folks would ever think that could happen, but she did it and she was very successful. So I know it's mostly just trying to figure out how do we do this so we have integrity, but that it allows folks to also have a more accessibility to being able to do certain things, in whether it's a test or whether it's actually coming to a board meeting. So we also conduct all of our board meetings virtually. And so I think one of the challenges has been, as we all know, the state's IT infrastructure isn't the same. And so, the learning curve was, making sure everybody's on mute. As I look at my screen, everyone's on mute. It takes some time to figure out that even when you're not talking, there's some feedback. But then also training my workforce around how to use the different platforms, and then working with board members who also live around the state that they may have buffering issues, and sort of what are the IT issues and how do we figure out and navigate them as well. So it's been a great, I think, challenge, but it's also, I think, opened us up to what we actually can do, and it will increase our accessibility once we get to the other side of this. And the hope is some of the things that has worked, that we can continue to do so that folks can actually participate in board meetings or appeal meetings remotely, and not always have to physically come to the Boston office to participate. So I think that's pretty much sums it up in a little snapshot.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, folks, I want to reiterate, I think you can tell, from the remarks of my colleagues here, the caliber of professional that we have working at the Office of Consumer Affairs. These are three top-notch professionals, and I will tell you, I believe we still have another commissioner here with us, Commissioner Karen Charles Peterson of the Department of Telecommunications and Cable. But these folks, I can assure you, like many of you, particularly in small businesses, Bob, that you encounter every day, these folks are literally working around the clock. It's not uncommon that we're talking the 4 or 5 of us, 10, 11 o'clock at night on any given issue. But I think it's important to know that these folks are here. They take their roles very seriously on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth, the licensees that they oversee, the businesses that they regulate. They take this, to heart. The passion and work ethic is second to none. So I'm thrilled to work with them every day, and I'm just glad that you all had an opportunity to get a little look inside and to see the type of folks that we have out there working for you. So, Amy, I think at this point, do we have a few questions, or before we wrap it up? I know we have our next segment at 11. One quick thing I'd like to add before we go to a question or two. Again, you've heard from our commissioners, which is the regulatory side of the house for me. The other side of the house is my consumer affairs hat. And again, we're out there on the front lines every day battling for consumers. This is a small business forum, of course, but waste, fraud, and abuse affects all of us, affects small business customers, ultimately affects your businesses. So I would just say stay vigilant. I get a lot of my good stuff from you all, Amy. I know the BBB has been tracking the latest scam on coronavirus, vaccines and therapeutics and clinical trials. It is really important to pay attention to that stuff. The scammers and the criminals, the cyber criminals, are really kind of one step ahead of us all. So whether it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Unemployment scam with fraudulent UI claims, or government imposter scams like Social Security, all these things. I would say, the BBB does a tremendous job at tracking these. Again, I use a lot of this in my own research and on social media for OCABRA. It's very important. We're all in this together. We need to stick together and mostly at this time help and protect our small businesses, who again, ultimately it affects all of us. So it's during the pandemic, it's particularly important that we stay vigilant and kind of stay, one step ahead of the scammers, because they're just ever present and particularly active, taking advantage of vulnerable people during this challenging time. So that's it for me. Thank you, Amy. If we have a few questions, I'd love to partake in those.
Sure. And I just want to, first of all, say thank you to all of you for that fantastic program. And, just sort of elaborate a tiny bit on what you were mentioning and staying up to date on, the latest scams and fraud concerns. We've been so fortunate, our Better Business Bureau office, to be collaborating with the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation over the course of the last, I want to say maybe 5 years now, with Robin Putnam, Research and Special Projects Manager, in delivering free programs across the Commonwealth. Robin and I deliver approximately 200 free programs every year throughout Massachusetts to various community groups and organizations and businesses resources on fraud concerns, identity theft issues, scams. And it's been a pleasure to be able to work with her and to collaborate with your office, because it is just so important that we are staying up to date on what those concerns are, what those issues are, and just continuing to educate and inform. And, you know, although we've had, again, some technical glitches today during this, we have been able to pivot over the course of the last 8 months in delivering our programs virtually. So if you know of an organization, or if someone's contacting you on behalf of a business, a small business, or a nonprofit, or an organization that would like a free program on scams or fraud concerns, identity theft issues, COVID scams in particular. I noticed one of our attendees commented in the comment box that they were contacted by a scammer, but deleted the email. But the scam was a COVID vaccine trial scam. It is very common. The fraudsters aren't going anywhere. You know, there are always going to be updates to the tactics that they use and utilize. And especially as this pandemic continues to evolve, so will their tactics. And so it does not surprise me that there was an email received about a vaccine trial. And I'm sure soon it will be that the vaccine has actually just, you know, been released, and you can be the first one to try it. And there's going to be new things as we get into the winter months. I'm sure we'll receive emails about, you know, hand sanitizer and gloves and toilet paper again. So it's just about staying up to date on what those are, and being aware that you can contact the Better Business Bureau, you can contact the Massachusetts Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, and the Small Business Administration, and just double check that you're hearing from a real business. There are resources that are available to you, and all three of the partners and participants today are free resource tools for consumers. It doesn't cost a thing to contact one of our agencies or organizations just to double check and reaffirm whether or not the email you're receiving is legitimate or not. I didn't see any new questions come